But today we want to go on and we want to see how this relates to us. What does the invisible war have to do with you and I? Are we fighting in it? And how do we fight in it? How do we guard against certain things? We want to start out by talking about the turning point of the war. Now, in every major battle, in every major war, there is a battle where the war takes a turn. You know, two sides are kind of tugging war at each other and you don't know who's going to win. And then finally there's a decisive battle that sort of takes place, and then it's pretty clear who the winner is going to be. Now, if you watched football yesterday, we had the Civil War, and that was Oregon and Oregon State. There came a point in that game, unfortunately for Oregon State, it was fairly early on, where you began to realize that the Ducks were going to win this one. But that's true of any war, any contest. There comes a point, a turning point in the battle or in the war. You think of the Civil War. And in the Civil War, I've studied that a little bit, and I believe that it was the Battle of Gettysburg that was the turning point of the war. Up until that point, the sides were pretty evenly matched. The South actually might have been having the advantage. The South had a superior general in Robert E. Lee, and he was very tactical, a military genius. And so he was kind of having the upper hand until he got to the Battle of Gettysburg. And what happened in Gettysburg was a very bloody battle. So many men lost in that one particular battle because what happened was the North would send a wave of soldiers to the South and they would shoot them down. And then they'd send another wave and they'd shoot them down. And they kept bringing wave after wave after wave until they finally wore the South soldiers down, the rebels. And so it was a very bloody war, but that was the battle where the South really, it became clear that they were outnumbered. They just didn't have the resources to keep this thing up. And so, and then you think about World War II, and when Hitler and the Axis powers there, Mussolini in Italy and Hitler in Germany, and they pretty much took over the continent of Europe. And they controlled Europe, and the way they did it was that they went to all the beach fronts and they set up places where their military forts, where their military had machine guns, and anybody that tried to come onto the beach, they'd just mow them down. And so it was near impossible to get any kind of a beachhead, get any kind of a foothold in Europe. And so Hitler just controlled the whole thing. And finally, the Allied powers, Great Britain and the United States primarily, put a plan together where they found a beach in France called Normandy. And they said, that is the place where we think we have a chance to gain a foothold. And so you remember the story and how all the ships came into that beach and they just unloaded soldier after soldier and waves. And the Germans would just start mowing them down. Again, there were a lot of men that lost their lives in the Battle of Normandy. But finally, some men were able to get to the machine guns and were able to take them out, and then that allowed a beachhead to be established, and that was the turning point of the war. Now, it wasn't the end of the war. It was the turning point where you could see at that point, okay, they've gotten a foothold into Europe, and now they're going to be able to take over, and sure enough, the General Eisenhower came up through Italy, and the other troops went in through Normandy, and they met in Berlin, in Germany, and the Russians came from the east. And so Berlin was divided up into 4 pieces. Anyway, that was the end of the war, but the beginning of the end was at Normandy. That was the turning point. Now, we say all that because in the invisible war, we've already gone through the turning point. The battle was when Jesus was on the cross. And the battle is described here in Genesis chapter 3, when it says, you will, the seed of the woman will crush your head, but you will crush his heel. And so that's what happened on the cross, is that the serpent did crush the heel of our Savior as he died. He literally died and was dead for 3 days, but then he rose from the grave. And so we have the death and resurrection, and that is the turning point in the battle in the invisible war, and that's very important to keep that in mind. as we go along here. Now, it says in 1 Peter 3:18 about this turning point, "For Christ also died for sins once for all, the just for the unjust, in order that he might bring us to God, having been put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit, in which also he went and made proclamation to the spirits now in prison, who once were disobedient, when the patience of God kept waiting in the days of Noah." Now you say, what does that mean? It's talking about Jesus when he went to the cross, when he rose from the dead. And what it's saying is that as he was dead for 3 days, he wasn't just dormant. He was busy during those 3 days. His spirit, it says, went to proclaim to other spirit beings, who I believe were part of Satan's army, that had been around in the days of Noah and that had been temporarily locked up in Hades. And Jesus descended, we're told in Ephesians 4, descended into the deepest parts of the earth. And he went and proclaimed, we're told here in 1 Peter 3, he proclaimed to them that the battle had been won, that he had gone to the cross, that he had taken care of sin, that he was going to rise from the dead, and that would conquer death, and that their fate was sealed. So he's announcing there that this is the turning point in the battle itself. Now, when I was a kid, probably about 4 or 5 years old, we didn't have video games and color TV and all the distractions that kids have now. And so we just had to make up things to do. We didn't have huge swimming pools and that sort of thing. And so when it got hot on a summer day, we just got the water hose out. That was our swimming pool, you might say. And so we'd play around with the hose and squirt each other. And there were always bees in our yard because, there were wildflowers growing in the summertime. And so there were bees around. You kind of had to watch out for the bees because you might get stung. And so we had the water hose going, and somehow I was able to take the hose and I hit a bee and it fell to the sidewalk. And it was just kind of buzzing around there on the sidewalk. It was stunned. And I thought, I should kill that bee. And so I was barefooted, as you are with your swimming suit on and shooting each other with a hose. And so I clamped down, I put my heel down on that bee and I stomped on it. And I stomped right on the stinger. And I will never forget, that bee sting really stung. And it hurt bad. But the bee was dead. It didn't survive that. So the bee kind of got me, but I really got the bee. Well, that's a small picture of what Christ did on the cross. Is that Satan, he dealt a blow to the Lord. He killed him. He was dead because of our sin. But he didn't stay dead. And in the process of all that, Satan sealed his own doom. He was defeated by that very act that perhaps he thought he was going to destroy the Savior. It backfired on him. It was a perfect strategy from the Lord's point of view. So this is a picture of what happened there in this strategic battle.